I titled this week's episode of Art of Supply with a question. Can Apple reshore the iPhone? Now, for a simple question, I think there are different ways we can look at it. For instance, very simply, can they do it today? No. Not only do we not have the capabilities in the United States currently, the final product would cost about $3,500. That's probably not good for iPhone sales. But can Apple do it, period, over time? I actually think that's a much more interesting question. Now, the good news here is Apple is approaching the reshoring effort in a multi pronged way. I'm counting 4 prongs, but I'm sure there are many others. I think about investment in capacity and capabilities, supply partnerships, talent, and even rare earths. Apple is currently in a fight, ultimately trying to minimize and mitigate global trade related costs and risks. If anyone can do it, I think Apple has a good shot. And if they succeed, it may create a model that other companies and industries can follow. And so, in this episode of Art of Supply, we'll talk about the incentives Apple has to make this work and the disincentives they face if they fail. We'll look at how they're investing domestically in terms of capacity, partnerships, and talent. And then finally, how they are thinking big, all the way back to the raw materials required in the silicon and battery supply chains. Now, before we dig into what Apple is trying to do, let's just acknowledge how massive of a challenge this is. Earlier this year, President Trump said that he wants the Apple iPhone to be manufactured entirely in the United States. But let's think about their current bill of materials. The iPhone currently has 2,700 components. Those components come from 187 suppliers in 28 countries today, according to the Financial Times. For a baseline, less than 5% of those components are currently manufactured in the United States. Now, this isn't impossible because, on the other hand, only 30 Apple suppliers operate completely outside of the United States. Some of the more sophisticated parts are made in Taiwan, and then there are a few key elements that are manufactured in South Korea or Japan. There are some pretty specific and nuanced things required to make the iPhone. For instance, here's a story that really stuck with me, one that I read in TechSpot. There are 74 teeny tiny screws that hold the iPhone together. Those screws are made in China and India, and they are screwed into place by hand, all 74. With Apple shipping the equivalent of 438 phones every minute, 85% of which are assembled by Foxconn, which has dozens of locations in China, that means over 32,000 teeny tiny screws have to be put into place by hand every minute of every day just to keep up with the shipping schedule. Now, if that doesn't sound like enough, Apple doesn't just have to move suppliers and supply chains home. They actually need to unwind a complex global network of partnerships and production processes that have taken years to build up. To make this happen, there have to be strong forces in favor of the change, as well as serious downsides to failure. So let's talk about carrots and sticks, Teddy Roosevelt style. President Trump has some in each hand. The carrots are either lowering or allowing Apple to escape costly tariffs associated with importing components and materials from other parts of the world. Other carrots include high visibility opportunities like the August session at the White House, where Apple announced their plans. We can even put a number on the value of that sort of event. Wall Street's response to the news was to send Apple's stock price soaring. It jumped nearly 5%, adding about $140 billion to the company's market value in just one day. There are also risks to be mitigated. Tim Cook is a smart guy and a former supply chain pro, I should mention. He can read the writing on the wall. China is not getting less risky, and India can't be fully up to speed quickly enough. In fact, even before Donald Trump taking office, Apple was already in the process of shifting a lot of its production to India from China. So those are the carrots. How about the sticks? Well, we have to start with tariffs. That's very easy. In the third quarter of 2025, Apple paid $800 million in tariff related costs. If things remain unchanged, they anticipate paying $1.1 billion in Q4. Now, because semiconductors are getting a lot of attention, in fact, Trump has proposed a 100% tariff on imported semiconductors. That would be a great thing to avoid. Now, other sticks. Apple doesn't want bad press. Tim Cook would rather be celebrated by the White House than condemned by it. That bad press can put downward pressure on their stock price and consumer sentiment, just like the good news made it all soar. And there's always the external risk of doing nothing, leaving Apple overly dependent on China. Now, in that August 6th White House announcement, we got the following news. Apple plans to invest $100 billion in U.S. manufacturing across 10 states. If that sounds like a large number, it's actually a plus factor. That $100 billion is in addition to the $500 billion Apple announced in February. The total $600 billion investment will be used over the course of the next 4 years. Now, in addition to straight money, Apple also announced their American Manufacturing Program. It's meant to allow for more Apple production to happen domestically, for instance, including their Houston, Texas factory, which will manufacture AI servers. Apple's ultimate goal is to build an end-to-end silicon supply chain. And they're allocating capital to build that comprehensive chain all the way from raw materials, including those rare earths, right through final packaging. And Apple's being smart about this. They're not doing it in isolation. They're incentivizing their suppliers to make the move with them. And they're looking at talent. Apple plans to have 20,000 new US hires in the next 4 years. Those jobs will be created in research and development, silicon engineering, software development, and of course, AI and machine learning. In an associated statement, Apple Chief Operating Officer Sabi Khan said, quote, "We're committed to supporting U.S. suppliers involved in every key stage of the chip-making process, from the earliest stages of research and development to final fabrication and packaging. We want America to lead in this critical industry, and we're expanding our efforts to grow a silicon manufacturing ecosystem that will benefit innovators across America." Now, as essential as those semiconductor chips are, that $600 billion will go into a few very large piles of money. 40% of it will be for supplier expansions and R&D hubs. A couple of examples include the Apple Corning Innovation Center in Kentucky that will go towards that Gorilla Glass that's used on phones and watches. We also know that they're working with other companies around making sure they're able to scale up to hit the volumes that Apple needs for all of those phones. 30% will go to domestic fabs and tool installations. 20% will go to providing training through the Apple Manufacturing Academy in Detroit, Michigan. That will focus on AI and machine learning for process optimization. And then finally, 10% will go to infrastructure investments within Apple's own network, like that Houston server facility. For now, and that's a key phrase, for now, it looks like Apple will be exempt from some of the new tariffs that would otherwise double their product prices. Now, of course, some people view this investment that the company is making as strategic along political lines. And it's impossible to ignore the amount of pressure that Tim Cook and the Apple team are under, given how high visibility they are and how much attention Trump has directed their way. He has been very clear. He wants the iPhone produced here. And he also wants more manufacturing jobs in the United States. There are questions as well about how much of this news is truly new and how much of it is a repackaging or a reannouncement of what was already happening. Politics and spin aside, this is a massive shift, and it's going to be something for all of us to watch over the next 4 years. Apple has always invested in their suppliers and supply chains. They currently partner with thousands of suppliers across all 50 states. I mean, obviously, that's beyond the iPhone, but it means they have those relationships throughout the country. Through those suppliers, they support, according to their own estimates, 450,000 supplier and partner jobs. They also say that about two-thirds of the components that Apple makes in the United States are exported to customers outside of the country. Now, their largest supplier, TSMC, is also making similar investments. Earlier this year, they committed $165 billion to expand their US manufacturing capacity. And they've been a big part of the story with the CHIPS and Science Act. But there are other companies involved in this as well. Corning, Coherent, Applied Minerals, Texas Instruments, and Broadcom are all part of the partnerships associated with the investment in Apple's supply chain. I mentioned the Gorilla Glass factory. So Apple is making a $2.5 billion investment in Corning to help them create the world's largest and most advanced smartphone glass production line, and it will also be the home of the Apple Corning Innovation Center. Now, all of what we've talked about is predominantly sort of end of the production process. The reality is, the only way Apple is going to free themselves from China is to solve the rare earth minerals problem. MP Materials is the only fully integrated rare earth producer in the United States, and they are part of Apple's partnership program as well. In addition to working with them as a source of rare earth minerals, the two companies are keeping an eye on circularity as well. They're going to establish a rare earth recycling line in Mountain Pass, California. And these recycling lines will, quote, close the loop on materials, potentially reducing raw import needs by 20 to 30% based on similar closed loop models in electronics. So they're thinking about the scarcity of these materials. They're thinking about not letting anything go to waste. And they're also thinking about the people that are going to be required to make this plan work. Apple has been very clear that addressing domestic talent shortages, in addition to building up all of these material and assembly capabilities, will be absolutely essential. And so, as part of their announcements, they've talked about the founding of the Apple Manufacturing Academy, something they're doing in partnership with Michigan State. Now, this is actually the second time Apple has collaborated with the university. They also did so back in 2021 to found the Apple Developer Academy. Once again, the approach through partnership allows not just everyone to bring the best of what they know and what they can do, but it's critically going to speed up this whole process of helping Apple figure out how much can be done domestically. Now, we've talked about the partnerships, the components, the talent, the rare earths. I think we have to come back to the question of whether it all can work. I liked what Johnny Evans had to say in an article he wrote for Computer World. Quote, "What I'm saying is that Apple's now $600 billion investment in US manufacturing appears to reflect a realistic attempt to ease some of the pain points that need to be solved if a tech industry manufacturing renaissance is to be unleashed in the United States." Two words I like in there: realistic and renaissance. So we have massive incentives to make this work. And you have to give Tim Cook credit. He's doing his darndest. Now, that doesn't mean, as I said at the beginning, that this is possible today. An increasing number of components will be made in the United States, but he's been very clear that final assembly will continue to be done elsewhere for a while, likely in China, where all of the tooling skills and the number of people already trained to do the work are in place. Trump seems to be willing to play ball as well. He's not getting the unequivocal yes he wants in response to that question: can you produce the iPhone in the United States? But I think he recognizes the level of effort and investment that Apple is willing to put towards that effort. Now, for both of them, and likely for all of us as well, there's still more to this than the simple math around costs and tariffs. One of the more interesting pieces I read in preparing for this episode, albeit a little bit less mainstream, was the AI notes from a May episode of the This Week in Tech podcast. One part read, quote, even with the 25% tariff, importing iPhones would still be dramatically cheaper than manufacturing them domestically. The reality is that to make US manufacturing cost competitive with current imports, the tariff would need to be closer to 200%, a number that would make iPhones prohibitively expensive for most consumers. So if we do that math, it has to be about more than the tariffs or the cost of the product. Now we know Apple's profit margins currently exceed 40%. Granted, that's across product lines. And that's even with all of their visible efforts to continue reducing costs and optimize their supply chains. So there is still more to this picture that's being discussed in the headlines. So I return to my initial question. Can Apple reshore the iPhone? It remains true that where there's a will, there's a way. But I do think a lot of this comes down to politics. If the political winds continue to blow in the same direction, I think we'll keep getting closer and others will likely follow suit. It is worth noting that both the $600 billion in investment and also the 20,000 domestic manufacturing jobs are planned over the next 4 years. And what else goes in 4-year cycles? Right. So we know how that plays out. If the winds of trade and politics remain the same, Apple and other companies just like them are going to have to figure out how to manage the costs, the risks, the optics, and the politics. But if the winds of trade and politics change, well, then I think we'll be asking a whole new set of questions and running all new optimization scenarios.